A father and daughter disappeared while heading to the beach in 1979, leaving their family devastated and searching for answers. 18 years later, a shocking discovery changes everything and reopens a case that seemed lost forever. The morning fog clung to the streets of Salem, Oregon, when the persistent knocking echoed through Patricia Harris's quiet home. She wiped her hands on the kitchen towel and walked toward the front door, wondering who would visit so early on a Tuesday. Through the peephole, she saw a woman in a dark coat holding a badge, and Patricia's heart immediately began racing with a familiar dread that had haunted her for 18 long years. "Mrs. Harris, I'm Detective Lisa Thompson with the Salem Police Department," the woman said as Patricia opened the door. "I need to speak with you about a discovery that was made yesterday at the old Riverside junkyard." The detective's expression carried the weight of difficult news, and Patricia gripped the doorframe to steady herself. "We found what appears to be a vehicle that matches the description of your husband's car from 1979. The words hit Patricia like a physical blow, and she felt her knees weaken as memories of that terrible summer day came flooding back. "The red Chevrolet?" she whispered, her voice barely audible above the morning breeze that rustled through the maple trees lining her street. Detective Thompson nodded solemnly and explained that the car had been discovered buried beneath nearly 2 decades of accumulated debris and twisted metal at the abandoned junkyard on the outskirts of town. Some tourists were exploring the area yesterday when they noticed bright red paint showing through the rust and overgrown vines. Detective Thompson continued, watching Patricia's face carefully for signs of shock. The detective explained that the visitors had initially thought it was just another abandoned vehicle, but the distinctive color and the car's crushed condition had prompted them to contact the authorities. "The vehicle appears to have been deliberately concealed and compacted, which is why it went undiscovered for so long." Patricia closed her eyes and whispered a desperate prayer for strength, feeling the familiar crushing weight of grief mixed with something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope flickered in her chest like a candle flame in the wind, fragile but undeniably present after 18 years of unanswered questions. "Dear God, please give me the courage to face whatever truth this discovery brings," she murmured, her hands trembling as she opened her eyes to meet the detective's compassionate gaze. "We'll need to excavate the vehicle very carefully to preserve any evidence that might still remain after all these years," Detective Thompson explained, her voice gentle but professional. She cautioned Patricia that the passage of time and environmental factors might have compromised potential clues, but emphasized that modern forensic techniques could sometimes reveal information that wouldn't have been detectable in 1979. "Every precaution will be taken to ensure we don't miss anything that could help us understand what happened to your family." The memories of that devastating July day crashed over Patricia in waves as she stood in her doorway, remembering how Michael had loaded their beach supplies into the bright red car, while 9-year-old Emma bounced excitedly in her purple dress. They had planned to spend the entire day at the coast, building sandcastles and collecting seashells, but they never returned home that evening. "They were so happy when they left," Patricia whispered, her voice breaking as she recalled Emma's infectious laughter, echoing through the house one final time. Recent weeks had brought a series of unsettling incidents that Patricia had tried to dismiss as coincidences, but now they seemed ominously connected to this discovery. Strange vehicles had been parked on her street for days at a time, with unfamiliar men sitting inside who seemed to be watching her house. Her mail had been arriving late or disappearing entirely, and she had found personal items in her home moved slightly from their usual places, as if someone had been searching through her belongings. "Mrs. Harris, I want you to know that this investigation will receive our full attention and resources," Detective Thompson assured her, sensing the mixture of hope and fear in Patricia's expression. The detective explained that while 18 years was a significant amount of time for evidence preservation, recent advances in forensic science had made it possible to extract information from seemingly impossible sources. "We'll approach this case with fresh eyes and modern techniques that weren't available when your husband and daughter first disappeared. I need to be there when you excavate the car," Patricia said firmly, surprising herself with the strength in her voice despite the emotional turmoil churning in her chest. Detective Thompson started to protest, mentioning the potential psychological impact and the unpredictable nature of what they might discover, but Patricia's determination was unwavering. "I've waited 18 years for answers, and I won't wait any longer from the sidelines while someone else searches for the truth about my family." As they walked toward Detective Thompson's unmarked police car, Patricia noticed the same dark sedan that had been circling her neighborhood for the past week. now parked 3 houses down with its engine running. The driver wore sunglasses despite the overcast morning, and when Patricia pointed out the vehicle to the detective, it immediately pulled away from the curb and disappeared around the corner. "That car has been here almost every day recently," Patricia said, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the Oregon morning air. The drive to the junkyard passed in tense silence as Patricia stared at the partially visible red metal that had once carried her most precious treasures toward what should have been a day of joy and laughter. She knew that this discovery would either finally bring the closure she had desperately sought for 18 years, or it would tear open wounds that had never truly healed, forcing her to confront truths that might be too painful to bear. If you're enjoying this story, subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell to hear more stories like this one. Heavy machinery groaned to life in the early morning hours as the excavation team began the delicate process of removing 18 years of accumulated debris from around the crushed red vehicle. Twisted metal, rusted car parts, and overgrown vegetation had created a tomb of steel and earth that would require careful dismantling to preserve any evidence that might remain. The crew worked with archaeological precision, photographing each layer before removal and cataloging every fragment that might hold significance to the case. Yellow police tape fluttered in the Oregon breeze as Patricia stood behind the perimeter, her hands gripping the metal barrier while she watched the painstaking work unfold before her eyes. Each piece of debris that was lifted away revealed more of the bright red paint that had once been her husband's pride and joy, now faded and scarred by nearly 2 decades of concealment. The methodical scraping of shovels against metal created an eerie soundtrack to her vigil, punctuated by the occasional camera flash documenting the excavation's progress. "Can you tell me about the last morning you saw Michael and Emma?" Detective Thompson asked, her notebook ready as she guided Patricia toward a more private area away from the excavation noise. Patricia took a deep breath and began recounting that July morning in 1979, describing how excited Emma had been about building the biggest sandcastle on the beach. "They planned to take Highway 18 to the coast," Patricia explained, "but Michael mentioned he might stop at that little roadside fruit stand that Emma loved so much. There was someone at Michael's garage who always made me uncomfortable," Patricia said, her voice dropping to nearly a whisper as she remembered Robert Martinez's intense stares and inappropriate comments. She explained how Robert had worked alongside Michael for several years and seemed to know far too much about their family's daily routines and personal business. He would ask strange questions about our weekend plans and seemed particularly interested in when Michael would be away from the house, Patricia continued, noting how Robert's behavior had become increasingly intrusive in the months before the disappearance. Detective Thompson scribbled detailed notes about Robert's suspicious behavior, particularly his unrequited romantic feelings for Patricia and his intimate knowledge of Michael's work schedule at the garage. "Did Robert ever make any direct advances or threats?" the detective asked, observing Patricia's obvious discomfort when discussing the man. Patricia nodded and explained that Robert had cornered her at a company picnic just weeks before the disappearance, telling her that Michael didn't deserve someone like her and that she would be better off with someone who truly appreciated her beauty and intelligence. "I've been finding these strange notes on my car windshield for the past 2 weeks, Patricia said, reaching into her purse to show Detective Thompson several pieces of paper with block letter messages. The warnings were written in black marker on plain white paper, with phrases like, "Let sleeping dogs lie," and "Some secrets are better left buried." The handwriting was deliberately disguised, making identification impossible, but the messages clearly indicated that someone wanted Patricia to stop asking questions about her missing family. A collective gasp from the excavation team drew their attention back to the site, where workers had uncovered a collection of personal items scattered throughout the crushed vehicle's interior. Patricia's heart raced as she recognized a small purple hairband that had been Emma's favorite accessory, the same one her daughter had been wearing on that fateful morning when they left for the beach. "That's Emma's," Patricia whispered, tears streaming down her face as the reality of the discovery hit her with devastating force. "The way this vehicle was crushed and positioned suggests it wasn't simply abandoned here," Detective Thompson explained, studying the preliminary findings from the excavation team's leader. "The car had been deliberately compacted, using heavy machinery, and then buried beneath layers of other vehicles and debris in a calculated attempt to ensure it would never be found. Someone with access to industrial equipment and knowledge of this location went to considerable trouble to hide this evidence," the detective noted, her expression growing more serious as the implications became clear. A pickup truck pulled up to the junkyard entrance, and Patricia watched as Kenneth Wright climbed out and approached the police perimeter with an eager expression on his weathered face. "I heard about the discovery on the police scanner," Kenneth announced to Detective Thompson, "and I thought I might be able to help with information about the road access and maintenance routes from back in 1979. His offer seemed genuine enough, but Patricia felt an immediate sense of unease as Kenneth's eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. Something about Kenneth's presence at the scene troubled Patricia deeply, though she couldn't quite articulate why his eager helpfulness felt so inappropriate under the circumstances. She remembered how Kenneth had always found excuses to visit their house during his years as the town's maintenance supervisor, claiming to check on street repairs or utility connections that never seemed to require actual work. "He used to come by our house at least once a month," Patricia told Detective Thompson quietly, "always asking personal questions about our family and commenting on how pretty Emma was getting as she grew older." The previous night had brought another disturbing incident that Patricia now realized was connected to the escalating pattern of harassment she had been experiencing since the car's discovery. She had found a carefully arranged bouquet of dead roses placed prominently in her front garden, their blackened petals forming an ominous circle around her mailbox. The flowers had been positioned with deliberate precision, creating a message that was impossible to misinterpret as anything other than a direct threat to her safety and well-being. As evening shadows began to lengthen across the junkyard, Patricia felt the unmistakable sensation of being watched by unseen eyes lurking somewhere beyond the perimeter of police activity. The feeling was so intense that she found herself constantly turning to scan the tree line and abandoned buildings that surrounded the excavation site, searching for any sign of movement or hidden observers. Despite the presence of multiple police officers and workers, Patricia couldn't shake the growing conviction that someone with malicious intent was monitoring every development in the case, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Frank Anderson's weathered hands shook slightly as he poured coffee for Detective Thompson in the cramped office trailer that served as the junkyard's headquarters. "I bought this place in 1985 from a man named Sullivan, who got it from the original owner sometime around 1981, Frank explained, consulting a stack of faded property documents. "Each time this place changed hands, the new owners just piled more cars on top of what was already here, which explains how that red vehicle stayed hidden for so long. The problem is that nobody kept detailed records about what vehicles came in or when they arrived," Frank continued, gesturing toward the mountains of rusted metal that stretched across the 20-acre property. His predecessor had operated more like a dumping ground than a legitimate business, accepting vehicles from anyone willing to pay the modest disposal fee without asking questions or maintaining proper documentation. People would just drive in, drop off their cars, pay cash, and leave without providing any identification or paperwork. Donald Brown's name surfaced during Detective Thompson's review of the case files when she discovered the unusual thoroughness of his insurance investigation into Michael's disappearance. Unlike typical missing person claims that were processed with standard procedures, Donald had conducted an exhaustive review that included multiple interviews with family members and neighbors. He seemed more like a detective than an insurance investigator, Patricia remembered, when the detective called to ask about her interactions with Donald in the months following the disappearance. Donald asked the strangest questions about Michael's daily routines and our family's financial situation, Patricia told Detective Thompson during their phone conversation that afternoon. She recalled how Donald had wanted to know specific details about Michael's work schedule, their weekend activities, and even Emma's school routine, claiming it was necessary to assess the validity of the life insurance claim. "He knew things about our family that seemed impossible for an insurance investigator to know unless he had been watching us closely." Records from the Oregon Department of Insurance revealed that Donald had made multiple visits to the Riverside junkyard during the summer and fall of 1979, ostensibly to investigate suspected vehicle insurance fraud cases. However, none of the other insurance companies in the region had any record of coordinating fraud investigations with Donald during that time period, raising questions about his true motives for visiting the facility. "His explanation for being there doesn't match up with any official insurance business," Detective Thompson noted in her growing file on potential suspects. Carlos Rodriguez presented a different type of investigative challenge because his transient lifestyle and lack of permanent documentation made him nearly impossible to trace through conventional means. Employment records from local farms showed that Carlos had worked various seasonal jobs throughout the Willamette Valley during 1979, but his pattern of moving frequently between temporary positions meant that no single employer had comprehensive information about his whereabouts. Migrant workers often lived under the radar back then, Detective Thompson explained to Patricia, which makes them both harder to track and potentially more dangerous. Kenneth Wright's eagerness to provide detailed information about Salem's maintenance routes and equipment access began to seem suspicious rather than helpful as Detective Thompson pressed him for specifics about his activities during the summer of 1979. "I knew every back road and remote location in this county," Kenneth boasted, spreading out hand-drawn maps that showed intimate knowledge of areas that weren't accessible to the general public. His familiarity with heavy machinery operations and secluded disposal sites made him a person of significant interest in the case, especially given his persistent presence around Patricia's family. Sleep became increasingly elusive for Patricia as mysterious phone calls began disrupting her nights with disturbing regularity, always occurring between midnight and dawn when she was most vulnerable and alone. The caller never spoke directly, but instead breathed heavily into the receiver or whispered incomprehensible words before hanging up abruptly, leaving Patricia wide awake and terrified in the darkness of her bedroom. "The timing is too consistent to be random," she told Detective Thompson, "and the whispers sound like someone who knows me personally." Tuesday morning brought the most chilling discovery yet, when Patricia found a collection of photographs scattered on her front doorstep, each one showing her going about her daily activities over the past several weeks. The images captured her leaving for work, grocery shopping, visiting the bank, and even gardening in her backyard, all taken from hidden vantage points by someone who had been systematically stalking her movements. "Whoever took these has been watching me for weeks," Patricia realized with growing horror as she examined the professional quality of the surveillance photography. "I need you to think carefully about that weekend in July 1979, Detective Thompson said to Kenneth during their second formal interview at the police station. Kenneth's demeanor had noticeably changed from helpful cooperation to nervous defensiveness as the questions became more specific and pointed about his exact whereabouts during the critical time period. "You mentioned working overtime on maintenance projects, but I need names of co-workers who can verify your activities and specific locations where you were working." Kenneth's story about working overtime during the weekend of Michael and Emma's disappearance began to unravel when Detective Thompson discovered that the town's maintenance department records from 1979 were mysteriously incomplete, with several pages missing from the work logs covering that crucial time period. "It's strange that only those specific dates are missing from otherwise complete records," the detective noted, observing Kenneth's increasing agitation as his alibi crumbled under scrutiny. "Can you explain why there's no documentation of the overtime work you claim to have performed?" The weight of multiple suspicious individuals created a complex web of potential threats that left Patricia feeling overwhelmed and uncertain about who she could trust among the people from her past. Robert Martinez's obsessive behavior, Donald Brown's intrusive insurance investigation, Carlos Rodriguez's untraceable presence, and Kenneth Wright's excessive helpfulness all pointed to men who had unusual access to her family's activities and potential motives for violence. "How am I supposed to know which one of them destroyed my family?" Patricia asked Detective Thompson, her voice breaking with frustration and fear as the investigation revealed more questions than answers. Laboratory results arrived at the Salem Police Department on Thursday morning, confirming what everyone had feared, but hoped wouldn't be true about the evidence recovered from the crushed red vehicle. Traces of human blood found on the car's interior matched the DNA samples that Patricia had provided, while fabric fibers embedded in the twisted metal were identical to the purple dress that Emma had been wearing on her final day. "This confirms that your husband and daughter were definitely in that car when something terrible happened to them," Detective Thompson told Patricia during a somber phone call that changed everything. Pressure mounted on Robert Martinez as Detective Thompson scheduled a more intensive round of questioning about his activities and whereabouts during the crucial hours when Michael and Emma disappeared from Salem. "I told you already I was working late at the garage that night," Robert insisted, but his defensive tone and nervous fidgeting suggested that his story contained significant gaps that needed explanation. The detective had discovered inconsistencies in Robert's timeline that didn't match with the garage's business hours or the work orders that were supposedly keeping him busy that evening. "The garage closed at 6 o'clock on weekdays back in 1979, so explain to me how you were working there until 9 or 10 that night," Detective Thompson pressed, watching Robert's face carefully for signs of deception. Robert stammered that he had been doing inventory and cleaning tasks that required staying after hours, but he couldn't provide specific details about what he had accomplished or any witnesses who might have seen him there. "You're asking me to remember specific details from 18 years ago," Robert protested, "but I'm telling you the truth about working late that weekend." Patricia discovered the systematic vandalism when she attempted to drive to work on Friday morning, finding all 4 of her car tires slashed with what appeared to be a sharp knife or razor blade. The cuts were precise and deliberate, designed to render the vehicle completely unusable rather than causing a dangerous blowout that might have resulted in an accident. "Whoever did this wanted to send a message and make sure I felt trapped and vulnerable," Patricia told Detective Thompson as they examined the damage together in her driveway. Financial records subpoenaed from the Oregon Department of Insurance revealed a troubling pattern of irregularities in several cases that Donald Brown had handled during the late 1970s, including suspicious claim approvals and unusually high settlement amounts. Donald was either incredibly careless with his paperwork or he was deliberately manipulating the system for personal gain, Detective Thompson explained to Patricia during their meeting at the police station. The detective had found evidence of at least 6 questionable cases where Donald's decisions had resulted in significant financial losses for his insurance company. Donald was facing serious financial problems in 1979, including gambling debts that were threatening his career and personal safety, Detective Thompson continued, showing Patricia copies of court documents and creditor notices that painted a picture of a desperate man. Donald had borrowed money from multiple sources to fund his gambling addiction, and his interest in Michael's substantial life insurance policy had gone far beyond normal professional curiosity. "He asked me at least 3 times about the exact amount of Michael's coverage and whether I planned to collect it immediately," Patricia recalled with growing unease. Kenneth Wright's second formal interview at the police station revealed even more troubling inconsistencies in his story about his access to town equipment and his activities during the weekend of the disappearance. "I've checked with the town's vehicle maintenance logs, and there are several discrepancies between what you've told me and what the records show," Detective Thompson informed Kenneth, spreading out the paperwork on the interview room table. Kenneth shifted uncomfortably in his chair as the detective pointed out entries showing that he had checked out a maintenance truck during the exact time period when Michael and Emma vanished. Saturday afternoon brought another escalation in the threatening messages when Patricia found a detailed letter in her mailbox, written in the same block printing that had appeared on the car windshield notes. "Some truth should remain buried for the protection of everyone involved," the message read, "and you're messing with forces you don't understand." The letter went on to warn Patricia that her persistent questions about the past were putting innocent people in danger and that she should stop before someone else got hurt. "I don't remember using that truck for anything specific that weekend," Kenneth claimed, when Detective Thompson confronted him with the maintenance logs showing his signature on the equipment checkout form. His memory seemed conveniently selective about the details of his work activities, despite his earlier claims about having perfect recall of his maintenance duties from 1979. "Maybe I signed it out but ended up not needing it," Kenneth suggested weakly. "Or maybe I used it for something so routine that I just forgot about it after all these years." Tracking down Carlos Rodriguez proved to be an increasingly complex challenge, as Detective Thompson discovered that the man had lived completely off the official record during his time in Oregon, working for cash payments and staying in temporary housing that left no paper trail. Migrant workers back then often lived in situations where nobody kept track of their comings and goings, a former farm supervisor explained to the detective. Carlos could have been anywhere during that summer, and there'd be no way to prove it one way or another without finding people who actually worked alongside him. Monday morning revealed a new form of harassment when Patricia discovered that her bank accounts had been mysteriously interfered with, preventing her from accessing her own money or conducting normal financial transactions. Her debit cards had been deactivated without her request, and several automatic payments had been blocked, creating a cascade of problems with her utility bills and mortgage payment. "Someone with access to personal information and financial systems is deliberately trying to disrupt my life," Patricia told Detective Thompson, feeling increasingly isolated and vulnerable as the attacks escalated. Evening prayers became Patricia's refuge from the growing terror that surrounded her daily existence, as she knelt beside her bed and poured out her fears to God in desperate whispers. "Dear Lord, please give me the strength to continue seeking the truth about what happened to Michael and Emma," she prayed, her voice breaking with exhaustion and fear. protect me from whoever is trying to stop me from finding answers, and help Detective Thompson catch the person who destroyed my family before they can hurt anyone else. Dust particles danced in the afternoon sunlight, streaming through the windows of the police department's storage facility, when Detective Thompson made a breakthrough discovery among boxes of old evidence files. Surveillance footage from a gas station located just 2 miles from the Riverside junkyard had been sitting forgotten in storage since 1979, mislabeled and buried beneath years of accumulated case materials. Sometimes the most important evidence hides in plain sight for decades, Detective Thompson muttered, as she carefully handled the deteriorated film canisters that might finally provide visual confirmation of who had access to the disposal site. The grainy black and white footage revealed a steady stream of vehicles visiting the junkyard during the summer of 1979, but the poor quality and distant camera angle made identifying specific makes, models, or license plates virtually impossible without enhancement. Several trucks and cars appeared on the footage during the critical weekend, including what looked like a maintenance vehicle, but the shadows and grain made definitive identification extremely challenging. "We'll need to send this to the State Crime Lab for digital enhancement," Detective Thompson explained to Patricia. But even then, 18-year-old surveillance footage has serious limitations. Tuesday morning's interrogation session at the police station put Robert Martinez under intense pressure as Detective Thompson confronted him with the mounting evidence of his obsessive behavior toward Patricia and his shifting stories about his whereabouts. "You've lied to me multiple times about that weekend, Robert," the detective said firmly, spreading photographs and witness statements across the interview table. "Your co-workers say you weren't at the garage. Patricia says you made inappropriate advances, and your alibi has more holes than Swiss cheese." Tears began streaming down Robert's weathered face as the weight of 18 years of guilt and shame finally overwhelmed his defenses against the truth. "I wasn't working late that night," he admitted through broken sobs. "I was at Murphy's Tavern drinking myself into oblivion because Patricia had rejected me again at the company picnic." His confession came pouring out in a torrent of self-recrimination and embarrassment about his alcohol addiction that had nearly destroyed his life during the late 1970s. 3 former garage employees contacted by Detective Thompson confirmed that Robert Martinez had struggled with severe alcoholism throughout 1979, often disappearing during work hours to drink at Murphy's Tavern on the outskirts of town. Robert would vanish for hours at a time, especially on weekends, his former supervisor explained to the detective over the phone. "We all knew he had a drinking problem, but back then, nobody talked about addiction the way we do now." Murphy's Tavern had maintained surprisingly detailed records of their cash transactions from 1979, and the receipts clearly showed Robert's presence at the bar during the entire evening when Michael and Emma disappeared from Salem. 3 regular customers from that era provided sworn statements confirming that Robert had been visibly intoxicated and talking nonsense about unrequited love throughout the night in question. "He was so drunk that the bartender almost called him a cab," one witness recalled, "and he kept mumbling about some woman who didn't appreciate his devotion." Relief washed over Patricia like a cool breeze on a hot summer day when Detective Thompson called to inform her that Robert Martinez had been cleared of any direct involvement in her family's disappearance. "I'm glad it wasn't Robert," Patricia told the detective, "but that still leaves 3 suspects who could have destroyed my family." Her relief was tempered by the knowledge that the real killer was still out there, still threatening her safety, and possibly growing more dangerous as the investigation closed in on the truth. Kenneth Wright's behavior became increasingly intrusive as he found excuses to visit Patricia's neighborhood and ask pointed questions about the progress of the police investigation into her family's disappearance. "Have they found any more evidence at the junkyard?" Kenneth asked during an unexpected visit to Patricia's front porch, his eyes scanning her property with uncomfortable intensity. "I'm just concerned about your safety with all these threats you've been receiving," he added, though his concern felt more predatory than protective. "Kenneth seems to know details about our investigation that we haven't released to the public," Detective Thompson observed during her evening briefing with Patricia at the police station. The detective had noticed Kenneth's unusual interest in specific evidence findings and investigative leads, suggesting that he either had inside information or was personally involved in the crimes. "Faye's asking questions that only the perpetrator would think to ask," the detective continued, "and his knowledge of the case goes far beyond what a helpful citizen should know." Donald Brown's desperate financial situation in 1979 continued to make him a compelling suspect. especially when combined with his detailed knowledge of the Harris family's insurance policies and personal routines. Credit reports and court documents revealed that Donald had owed substantial sums to multiple creditors, including some with connections to organized crime in Portland. Donald wasn't just facing bankruptcy, Detective Thompson explained to Patricia. He was facing potential physical harm from people who didn't accept excuses for unpaid gambling debts. Carlos Rodriguez remained a ghost in the investigation, with no forwarding address, no employment records, and no family members who could provide information about his whereabouts during the summer of 1979 or his current location. "It's like he vanished into thin air after that summer," Detective Thompson told Patricia with frustration evident in her voice. "Without finding Carlos or someone who worked with him, we can't eliminate him as a suspect, which means he remains dangerous until proven otherwise." Each elimination of a suspect brought Patricia simultaneously closer to the truth and deeper into danger, as the real perpetrator undoubtedly realized that the investigation was narrowing the field of potential culprits. "Whoever killed Michael and Emma is probably watching every development in this case," Patricia said to Detective Thompson during their nightly phone call, her voice trembling with a mixture of hope and terror. "They know that we're getting closer to identifying them, which means they're going to become even more desperate to stop us from finding the truth." If you're enjoying this story, subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell to hear more stories like this one. Washington State Police tracked down Carlos Rodriguez to a small farming community outside Spokane, where he had been living under the assumed name Carlos Morales for the past 15 years. The breakthrough came when Detective Thompson cross-referenced Social Security records with employment databases, eventually finding a man whose physical description and age matched their missing suspect. Carlos had completely reinvented himself after leaving Oregon, the detective explained to Patricia over the phone, but he kept detailed records of his movements that actually help his case rather than hurt it. "I remember that summer very clearly because it was when I decided to leave Oregon permanently," Carlos told Detective Thompson during a lengthy phone interview from his current home in Washington. He produced employment records, pay stubs, and witness statements showing that he had worked for a wheat farm near Walla Walla from early July through late August of 1979. "I left Salem in the first week of July because the farm work paid better and offered housing," Carlos explained, his voice carrying the weariness of a man who had spent decades trying to escape his past. Multiple sources confirmed Carlos's alibi with documentation that would have been impossible to fabricate, including payroll records from the Washington farm, signed witness statements from co-workers, and even a police report from a minor traffic accident that placed him definitively in Washington during the weekend of the disappearance. "Carlos was 300 miles away when your family vanished," Detective Thompson told Patricia with certainty. "He's got the most solid alibi of anyone we've investigated, which means we can officially eliminate him from our list of suspects." "I'm relieved that it wasn't Carlos," Patricia said during her morning phone call with Detective Thompson, "but now I'm terrified because we're down to just 2 suspects and both of them feel extremely dangerous." The process of elimination was bringing them closer to the truth, but it was also narrowing their focus to individuals who had demonstrated their willingness to kill and their determination to avoid capture. "Donald and Kenneth both had access to my family, and they both seem capable of violence," Patricia continued with growing anxiety. Friday night brought the most serious escalation in threats when Patricia returned home from grocery shopping to find every window on the first floor of her house shattered by what appeared to be deliberately thrown rocks. Shards of glass covered her living room floor, and spray painted across her front door in red letters was a chilling message that left no doubt about the perpetrator's intentions. "Stop before it's too late for everyone," glowed ominously in the porch light, turning Patricia's sanctuary into a crime scene that demonstrated the killer's escalating desperation. "Whoever did this is losing control," Detective Thompson observed as she examined the vandalism and photographed the threatening message for evidence documentation. The systematic destruction suggested careful planning rather than random violence, and the specific wording of the threat indicated that the perpetrator believed Patricia's continued investigation was putting additional people at risk. "This kind of escalation typically happens when we're very close to making an arrest," the detective explained, "which means we need to increase your protection immediately." Court records from 1979 painted a disturbing picture of Donald Brown's financial desperation, showing that he faced not only bankruptcy but also potential criminal prosecution for insurance fraud and embezzlement charges. Donald had borrowed money from loan sharks in Portland to cover his gambling debts. Detective Thompson explained to Patricia during their emergency meeting at the police station. The people he owed money to weren't the type to accept payment plans or excuses, and Michael's life insurance policy would have solved all of Donald's problems with one claim. Kenneth Wright's position as town maintenance supervisor had given him unprecedented access to heavy equipment, remote locations, and detailed knowledge of disposal sites throughout the Salem area during 1979. Kenneth knew every backroad, every abandoned property, and every piece of industrial machinery in the county, Detective Thompson noted as she reviewed his employment records and work assignments. He could have moved Michael and Emma's bodies to any number of locations that ordinary citizens would never even know existed. Laboratory analysis of the crushed vehicle revealed microscopic evidence that the compacting had been done by industrial equipment consistent with both insurance salvage operations and municipal maintenance machinery. The crushing pattern shows characteristics of equipment that both Donald and Kenneth would have had access to in 1979, the forensic expert explained to Detective Thompson over the phone. Without more specific toolmark analysis, we can't determine which type of machinery was actually used, which means both suspects remain viable from a technical standpoint. Both men had clear motives, definite opportunities, and proven access to the resources needed to commit these crimes, Detective Thompson summarized during her evening briefing with Patricia at the police station. Donald's financial desperation had made Michael's life insurance policy an irresistible target, while Kenneth's obsession with Patricia had created a twisted jealousy that could have motivated him to eliminate her family. The question now is determining which one of them actually crossed the line from motivation to murder, the detective continued grimly. Sleep became impossible for Patricia as she realized that one of the two remaining suspects was almost certainly the person who had destroyed her family and was now threatening her own life with increasing boldness. How do I protect myself when I don't know which one of them is the killer? Patricia asked Detective Thompson during their late-night phone conversation, her voice shaking with exhaustion and fear. They both seem equally dangerous, and they both have reasons to want me dead before I can identify them. Patricia knelt beside her bed that night and poured her heart out to God in desperate prayer, asking for wisdom to discern the truth and protection from the evil that surrounded her. Lord, please help Detective Thompson identify the person who murdered Michael and Emma, she whispered through tears of frustration and terror. Give us the evidence we need to bring justice for my family and keep me safe from whoever is trying to silence me before the truth can be revealed. Monday morning found Donald Brown sitting nervously in the Salem Police Department's interview room, his hands trembling as Detective Thompson laid out financial documents and insurance files that painted a damning picture of his activities in 1979. These records show a pattern of fraudulent claim approvals and suspicious settlement amounts that coincided exactly with your personal financial crisis, the detective said firmly, watching Donald's face for signs of admission or continued deception. We need to talk about how desperate you really were 18 years ago. Sweat beaded on Donald's forehead as he finally cracked under the mounting pressure of evidence and admitted to systematic insurance fraud during his years with the company. Yes, I manipulated claims and skimmed settlement money to pay my gambling debts, Donald confessed, his voice barely audible above the hum of the interview room's fluorescent lights. But I never hurt anyone physically, and I certainly didn't kill Michael Harris or his little girl just to collect on a life insurance policy. Where exactly were you during the weekend of July 14th through 16th, 1979? Detective Thompson pressed, leaning forward across the metal table as Donald struggled to remember specific details from 18 years earlier. Donald claimed he had been attending a mandatory insurance conference in Portland, but his initial inability to provide specific details about the event made his alibi seem questionable. If you were really at a conference, there should be registration records, hotel receipts, and witnesses who can verify your presence there, the detective continued relentlessly. Hotel records from the Portland Marriott confirmed that Donald Brown had indeed checked in on Friday, July 13, 1979, and remained registered through Sunday evening, with keycard access logs showing his presence throughout the weekend. Conference registration documents showed his attendance at multiple seminars and networking events, while meal receipts and bar tabs provided a detailed timeline of his activities during the crucial hours when Michael and Emma disappeared. Donald was definitely in Portland when the murders occurred, Detective Thompson confirmed to Patricia later that afternoon. Bank records supported Donald's alibi with credit card transactions at Portland restaurants and shops throughout the weekend, creating an electronic trail that would have been impossible to fabricate in 1979. Multiple conference attendees provided statements confirming conversations with Donald during coffee breaks and evening social events, establishing his presence through witness testimony. Donald's suspicious behavior was all about covering up his insurance fraud, Detective Thompson explained to Patricia, not about hiding involvement in your family's disappearance. Kenneth Wright suddenly found himself as the sole remaining suspect in a double murder investigation, and the intense scrutiny from law enforcement began to crack his carefully maintained facade of helpful cooperation. "I've been trying to help you people solve this case," Kenneth protested when Detective Thompson called to schedule another interview, but his voice carried a defensive edge that hadn't been present in their earlier conversations. "Why are you treating me like I'm some kind of criminal when all I've done is offer assistance?" Tuesday afternoon brought an unsettling encounter when Patricia stopped at the grocery store and found Kenneth Wright waiting beside her car in the parking lot. "I heard Donald Brown got cleared of suspicion," Kenneth said with an intensity that made Patricia step back toward the store entrance, her hand reaching for the cell phone in her purse. "That must mean the police are running out of leads and suspects," he continued, his eyes never leaving Patricia's face as he spoke in a tone that felt more like a threat than casual conversation. "I'm starting to worry that this investigation is targeting innocent people," Kenneth said, moving closer to Patricia, despite her obvious discomfort with his presence in the parking lot. His demeanor had undergone a complete transformation from the helpful, concerned citizen he had portrayed during the early stages of the case to someone who seemed angry and defensive about being questioned. "Maybe it's time to accept that some mysteries are meant to stay unsolved," Kenneth suggested, his words carrying an unmistakable warning about the consequences of continued investigation. Detective Thompson's review of town employment records revealed that Kenneth Wright had maintained unauthorized access to municipal vehicles and equipment well beyond his official retirement date in 1995. Master keys and access codes that should have been surrendered upon his retirement remained in Kenneth's possession, giving him continued ability to use town resources without oversight or documentation. Kenneth could have been using town equipment for personal purposes for years without anyone knowing, the detective explained to Patricia during their evening phone call. Vehicle checkout logs from 1979 showed that Kenneth had signed out a maintenance truck on Friday, July 13th, but had provided 3 different explanations for its use when questioned by Detective Thompson. First, he claimed he used it for routine pothole repairs, then he said it was for tree removal, and finally he insisted he never actually drove it anywhere, the detective noted. "People don't forget details about equipment usage unless they're trying to hide what they really used it for." Phone calls and unexpected visits from Kenneth Wright became a daily source of terror for Patricia as he attempted to monitor her activities and gather information about the police investigation's progress. "You seem upset about something, Patricia," Kenneth would say during his uninvited appearances at her workplace or grocery store, "and I hope you're not letting this investigation consume your life the way it seems to be doing." His concern felt predatory rather than genuine, and Patricia began to fear that Kenneth was planning something violent to permanently end her pursuit of the truth. Each night brought Patricia to her knees in desperate prayer as she sensed that the final confrontation with her family's killer was rapidly approaching. "Lord, please give me courage for whatever is coming," she whispered into the darkness of her bedroom, her hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. "Kenneth is becoming more dangerous every day, and I can feel that he's planning to hurt me before Detective Thompson can arrest him." Wednesday morning brought the breakthrough when a search warrant authorized complete examination of Kenneth Wright's property and personal belongings. Armed officers accompanied Detective Thompson to Kenneth's modest house on Elm Street, expecting to find evidence that would confirm or eliminate him as prime suspect. "We're looking for anything connecting Kenneth to the Harris family," Detective Thompson explained to the search team as they prepared to enter the house. Boxes of photographs hidden in Kenneth's bedroom closet revealed disturbing obsession with the Harris family, including hundreds of secretly taken pictures documenting their daily activities over several months in 1979. Images showed Michael working at the garage, Emma playing in the backyard, and Patricia hanging laundry, all captured from hidden vantage points demonstrating systematic surveillance. "He was stalking your entire family for months," Detective Thompson told Patricia during a phone call from the scene. A locked wooden box in Kenneth's basement contained personal items Patricia immediately recognized as belonging to Michael and Emma, carefully preserved like macabre trophies. Emma's silver bracelet, Michael's favorite fishing lure, and several pieces of missing clothing were arranged with ritualistic precision in the makeshift shrine. Kenneth kept these items as souvenirs, Detective Thompson explained to Patricia, her voice heavy with disgust at the twisted mentality revealed by the discovery. Handwritten journals in Kenneth's desk provided horrifying insight into his obsessive thoughts about Patricia and growing resentment toward Michael and Emma for blocking his delusional romantic fantasies. Patricia doesn't understand that Michael doesn't deserve her, read one June 1979 entry, and that little girl is always in the way. The journals chronicled Kenneth's escalating anger and belief that eliminating Michael and Emma would make Patricia available to him. Town maintenance records revealed Kenneth had systematically created false work orders and emergency calls, giving him legitimate reasons to visit remote areas for planning and executing crimes without detection. Kenneth would report fallen trees or road damage in secluded locations, Detective Thompson discovered, while reviewing fabricated paperwork, then use those fake emergencies as cover for scouting disposal sites. His position provided perfect cover for undetected criminal activity. Kenneth's journals contained detailed descriptions of luring Michael and Emma to an isolated location by claiming their car had mechanical problems. "I told them I was a town maintenance worker and noticed their car smoking," Kenneth wrote, with chilling matter-of-factness about the deception leading to their deaths. "Michael was so trusting he actually thanked me for stopping to help," the journal continued, revealing calculated manipulation that made the crimes possible. Final journal entries described Kenneth's escalating violence when Michael and Emma realized danger and attempted escape from the remote location. "The man tried to protect his daughter, but I was stronger and better prepared," Kenneth wrote with disturbing pride about overpowering his victims. "I couldn't let them leave and tell people what I had planned," the entry continued, documenting his decision to commit murder rather than allow witnesses. Maps and photographs in Kenneth's possession showed the remote quarry where he disposed of Michael and Emma's bodies, accessible only through maintenance roads requiring special geographical knowledge. The quarry was filled with water and had sheer rock walls, making it virtually impossible for bodies to surface, Detective Thompson explained to Patricia. Kenneth chose this location specifically because he knew it would keep his crimes hidden indefinitely. Evidence from Kenneth's garage confirmed he used town equipment to crush Michael's red Chevrolet before transporting it to the junkyard for concealment among discarded vehicles. Traces of red paint on Kenneth's personal tools matched the car's color, while hydraulic fluid stains in his driveway indicated where crushing had occurred. "Kenneth turned your husband's beloved car into scrap metal to hide evidence," Detective Thompson told Patricia, "then buried it where he thought it would never be found." Faced with overwhelming physical evidence and written confessions, Kenneth initially maintained innocence when Detective Thompson confronted him at the police station Thursday afternoon. "Those journals are just creative writing exercises," Kenneth claimed desperately, "and anyone could have planted evidence in my house to frame me." However, his alibis for the disappearance weekend completely collapsed when compared to documented evidence of his activities and the discovery of victims' personal belongings. "Kenneth Wright, you're under arrest for the murders of Michael and Emma Harris," Detective Thompson announced, as she prepared to place handcuffs on the man who had terrorized Patricia for 18 years. However, confusion arose when Kenneth complained of chest pains and appeared to have a medical emergency, causing officers to hesitate and call paramedics. In that brief distraction, Kenneth slipped away from the police station and disappeared into downtown Salem's crowded streets. News of Kenneth's escape reached Patricia within minutes, filling her with terror as she realized her family's murderer was free and desperate to eliminate the final witness. "He knows I can identify him, and his conviction is certain if I stay alive," Patricia told Detective Thompson during their emergency call. "Kenneth is going to try to kill me before you catch him again, and I don't know how to protect myself from someone planning this for 18 years. An abandoned warehouse on the industrial side of Salem became Kenneth Wright's final fortress when police tracked him down Friday evening, finding him barricaded inside the building where he had apparently been storing additional evidence of his crimes for years. Rusted machinery and forgotten equipment provided perfect hiding places for the disturbing collection of surveillance photos and personal items he had accumulated during decades of stalking behavior. "Kenneth has turned this place into his personal museum of obsession," Detective Thompson radioed to the backup units surrounding the building. Flashing red and blue lights illuminated the warehouse district as patrol cars established a perimeter around the building, while Detective Thompson attempted to establish communication with the fugitive inside. "Kenneth, this is Detective Thompson," she called through a megaphone positioned safely behind an armored vehicle. "We need to talk about resolving this situation peacefully." The only response from inside the warehouse was the sound of heavy objects being moved around, suggesting that Kenneth was fortifying his position for a prolonged standoff. "I'll only talk to Patricia Harris." Kenneth's voice finally echoed from a broken window on the second floor of the warehouse, his words carrying across the parking lot with surprising clarity. "She's the only one who deserves to hear the truth about what really happened to her precious family," he continued, his tone alternating between pleading and threatening. "Bring Patricia here, or I'll take my secrets to the grave, and she'll never know the whole story." Radio chatter filled the air as Detective Thompson consulted with her superior officers about the dangerous request to involve Patricia in the negotiations with an armed and desperate murder suspect. "Absolutely not," came the initial response from headquarters. "We don't negotiate with killers by putting victims in harm's way." However, Patricia's voice crackled through the detective's radio moments later, having overheard the conversation on the police scanner at her home. "I'm coming down there whether you approve or not," Patricia declared firmly. 20 minutes later, Patricia arrived at the warehouse wearing a bulletproof vest and surrounded by heavily armed officers who had reluctantly agreed to her participation in the final confrontation. "Kenneth Wright," Patricia called out toward the building, her voice steady despite the terror coursing through her veins. "I'm here now, so tell me what you did to my husband and daughter." The warehouse fell silent for several long seconds before Kenneth's face appeared in the broken window above. "I loved you, Patricia," Kenneth shouted down from his perch in the warehouse, his voice carrying a mixture of obsession and rage that chilled everyone within hearing distance. "Michael didn't deserve someone as beautiful and perfect as you, and I couldn't stand watching him waste the gift he had been given." Kenneth went on to describe in horrifying detail how his unrequited obsession had festered for months until he decided that eliminating Michael and Emma was the only way to make Patricia available to him. Kenneth's confession poured out in a torrent of twisted justification as he described luring Michael and Emma to the remote location and his escalating violence when they tried to escape. "I never meant for the little girl to get hurt," Kenneth claimed, though his journal entries had already proven otherwise, "but she started screaming, and I couldn't let her bring help before I had finished what I started." Every word of his admission was being recorded by police surveillance equipment, providing the conclusive evidence needed for prosecution. "I had it all planned out perfectly," Kenneth continued from his warehouse window, describing how he had intended to comfort Patricia in her grief and gradually win her affection after eliminating what he saw as obstacles to their relationship. "I was going to be your savior and protector," he said with delusional conviction, "but you never gave me the chance to show you how much better I could treat you than Michael ever did." The depth of his obsession became clear as he revealed years of planning and surveillance. Suddenly, Kenneth's voice changed to a strangled gasp as he clutched his chest and stumbled backward from the window, apparently suffering a massive heart attack brought on by the stress of the confrontation. "Call for paramedics immediately," Detective Thompson radioed as Kenneth's form disappeared from view and crashed sounds echoed from inside the warehouse. Within minutes, emergency medical personnel breached the building and found Kenneth collapsed on the floor, showing no signs of life despite their resuscitation attempts. "Kenneth Wright is dead," the paramedic announced over the radio after 20 minutes of unsuccessful revival efforts, confirming that the stress of being cornered had apparently caused fatal cardiac arrest. Patricia watched from behind the police barricade as Kenneth's body was wheeled out of the warehouse on a gurney, feeling a strange mixture of relief that her tormentor was gone and emptiness that her family's killer would never face trial. "At least you have answers now," Detective Thompson said softly, placing a comforting hand on Patricia's shoulder. "Justice had been served in the most final way possible," Detective Thompson assured Patricia as they prepared to leave the warehouse scene, though the resolution felt hollow compared to the satisfaction that would have come from seeing Kenneth face trial and imprisonment. "Sometimes the universe handles justice in its own way," the detective observed, "and Kenneth's death means you'll never have to worry about him threatening you again." Patricia nodded in agreement, but something about Kenneth's convenient collapse troubled her in ways she couldn't articulate. As Patricia walked back toward her car in the warehouse parking lot, she couldn't shake the feeling that Kenneth's medical emergency had seemed too perfectly timed and too conveniently final for someone who had spent 18 years successfully evading justice. The way he had clutched his chest and fallen backward had looked almost theatrical, and his apparent death had eliminated the need for a trial that might have revealed additional victims or accomplices. "Maybe I'm being paranoid," Patricia thought to herself, "but something about this doesn't feel right. 3 days of peaceful silence shattered when Patricia returned home from grocery shopping Tuesday evening to find Kenneth Wright waiting in her kitchen, very much alive and holding a large knife with practiced familiarity. "Surprised to see me?" Kenneth asked with a cold smile that revealed the calculated deception of his staged death at the warehouse. "I've been planning this moment for days, while everyone thought I was safely buried." His presence in her home confirmed Patricia's worst fears about the convenient timing of his apparent heart attack. "Paramedics aren't as thorough as they should be when they think someone is already dead," Kenneth explained as he moved closer to Patricia, blocking her path to the front door with deliberate positioning. He described how his knowledge of emergency medical procedures had allowed him to slow his heart rate and breathing enough to fool the responders into pronouncing him deceased. "A little trick I learned during my army days," Kenneth continued with disturbing pride, "and the funeral home was surprisingly easy to escape from once they left me alone." Cold calculation replaced the obsessive rambling that had characterized Kenneth's warehouse confession as he outlined his plan to eliminate Patricia and disappear permanently from Salem. "You're the only person left who can identify me and testify about what I did to your family," Kenneth stated with matter-of-fact brutality, "and once you're dead, I'll be free to start over somewhere else with a new identity." His eyes held no trace of the delusional love he had claimed to feel, only the predatory focus of someone prepared to commit murder. Patricia's hand found the panic button that Detective Thompson had insisted on installing in her kitchen during the previous week, and she pressed it desperately while Kenneth continued his monologue about covering his tracks. "That won't help you now," Kenneth said when he noticed her movement toward the alarm system, "because I cut the phone lines and disabled your electrical system before coming inside." However, the wireless panic device operated independently of the house's utilities, sending a silent distress signal directly to the police dispatcher. Terror gave Patricia unexpected speed as Kenneth lunged toward her with the knife, forcing her to flee through the back door into her garden, where the evening shadows provided minimal concealment from her pursuer. "You can't run forever, Patricia," Kenneth called as he chased her through the neighborhood streets, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who had been planning this attack for years. "I know every hiding place in this town, and I've been watching your routines long enough to predict exactly where you'll go." Sirens wailed in the distance as Detective Thompson and multiple patrol units raced toward Patricia's address, responding to the panic alarm that had triggered every available officer in the Salem Police Department. "All units converge on Maple Street immediately," Detective Thompson radioed as she pressed her patrol car to dangerous speeds through the residential streets. "Patricia Harris is in immediate danger from an armed suspect." The detective's heart pounded with the knowledge that she might be too late to save the woman who had become both victim and friend. Kenneth cornered Patricia against the wooden fence in her backyard, just as the first police cars screeched to a halt in front of her house, their emergency lights painting the evening darkness in alternating red and blue. "Drop the weapon and step away from Mrs. Harris," Detective Thompson shouted, as she rounded the corner of the house with her service pistol drawn and trained on Kenneth's center mass. "This is your final warning before we use deadly force," the detective continued, though Kenneth showed no intention of surrendering his murderous objective. The crack of gunfire echoed through the quiet neighborhood as Kenneth raised his knife and charged toward Patricia in a final desperate attempt to complete his 18-year quest for revenge. Detective Thompson's shot struck Kenneth's center mass, dropping him to the ground where he lay motionless among the roses that Patricia had planted in memory of her lost family. "It's over," Detective Thompson said softly as she approached Kenneth's body to confirm that he posed no further threat. "He can't hurt you or anyone else ever again." Exhaustion and trauma overwhelmed Patricia as she collapsed to her knees in the garden where she had spent countless hours grieving for Michael and Emma over the past 18 years. "I can't believe it's really finished," Patricia sobbed as Detective Thompson helped her to her feet and guided her away from Kenneth's lifeless form. "My family can finally rest in peace now that their killer is gone." The weight of nearly 2 decades of fear and uncertainty lifted from Patricia's shoulders like a physical burden being removed. Official closure came within days as the case was marked solved with Kenneth Wright's death, allowing Patricia to finally begin the process of grieving and healing that had been impossible while her family's killer remained free. "We recovered Michael and Emma's remains from the quarry Kenneth described in his journals," Detective Thompson informed Patricia during their final official meeting. "And you can arrange for proper burial services whenever you feel ready." The detective's words provided the closure that Patricia had desperately needed for 18 years. A simple graveside service brought Michael and Emma home to the Salem Cemetery, where Patricia could visit them whenever grief and memories became overwhelming. Thank you, Lord, for giving me the strength to endure 18 years of uncertainty and fear, Patricia prayed as she knelt beside the freshly placed headstones, her voice carrying across the peaceful cemetery grounds. I couldn't have survived this nightmare without your sustaining presence, and I'm grateful that justice has finally been served for my precious family. Peace settled over Patricia's heart for the first time since 1979, as she found comfort in knowing that divine justice had been served and that God had sustained her through the darkest period of her life. I understand now that you never abandoned me during those terrible years, Patricia whispered in her evening prayers, and that your plan included bringing Detective Thompson into my life to help me find the truth. She looked forward to the future with hope, knowing that Michael and Emma were at rest and that their killer could never hurt another family. If you enjoyed this story, please give the video a like, write in the comments where you're listening from, and be sure to subscribe and ring the notification bell. I'll see you in the next story on our channel.